And I just want to thank you all so much for coming and for caring. We're the ones who are stepping up to the plate here and looking at this issue. The official statement of the Town of Catskill is this: in response to calls from interest groups to address a potential siting of a monofill in the Town of Catskill. Since 2016, the board of the Town of Catskill and the public have received 2 presentations on monofills at regularly scheduled open town board meetings, which are streamed live and publicly archived. In those briefings, we were made aware that 2 private companies were in discussions about submitting an application for a permit involving a currently unused quarry in the Town of Catskill. To date, no such application has been submitted. If it were to be received, we would continue our policy of treating every applicant equally, consistent with statutory requirements. The process would automatically trigger a series of regulatory and environmental reviews at federal, state, and local levels, including the Town of Catskill Planning and Zoning Boards. At this time, however, no application has been received. So, one of the things that I want to accomplish tonight is just dispelling some of the rumors. I've heard it from some people that they thought it was already a done deal, and how can we march against this? So far, it's just between these 2 private companies, and the town has yet to even see an application for a permit. It's not to say that they couldn't do something in advance or preemptively, whatever. That is their choice. But that means that they would have to be circumventing the standard procedure, the due process that's in place now. And I think as residents of Catskill, long-term residents, we have to think long and hard before we push them to do something like that. I think that's one of the things that really rests on our shoulders as much as the town board. If we feel like it's important enough for them to go ahead and do something preemptively, or if we want them to follow the due process that's in place now. That's hopefully what Judith will speak to, or maybe you'll touch on it anyway. And certainly I hope what comes up in the questions, the Q&A tonight. The other thing is, what's a big unknown is how much do we stand to make from it? What in terms of tax revenue are we talking about? At this point, that's completely hypothetical. Again, rumors abound about, 250,000, $1 million a year. Nobody really knows because nothing has happened yet. But there's a lot of reasons for us all to get educated and learn about what we are talking about. So that's why we're here tonight. We've lined up 3 wonderful speakers. And where's Jessica? Jessica, are you around? Jessica Roth wanted to also jump in. Jessica Roth is from Riverkeeper, thank you, and she just wanted to say a couple of words before I introduce our esteemed speakers, but she's nowhere to be seen. Maybe I'll throw it to her at the end. So we're going to go ahead and start then. Our first one, we're just going to go to the lineup right as you see them here. To my left is Judith Enck. Judith is actually from Greene County, so she's kind of a home county girl. Was born and raised in Cairo, graduated from Catskill High School.
St. Patrick's.
Oh, that's right. I read that too. Thank you. St. Patrick's. We all know about St. Patrick's. It's even better, She's spent her entire career working to protect public health and the environment. She began as an environmental advocate and has held top positions in state and federal government, a few of which are a regional administrator for the Environmental Protection Agency, otherwise known as the EPA, appointed by President Obama. Deputy Secretary of the Environment in the New York State Governor's Office. Past president of the Hudson River Sloop Clearwater. Is now working. Where'd the lights go? Oh, okay. Oh, good. Oh, no, that's better. You don't need to see me. She's now working with the Hoosick Falls Support Network, which is very dear to her heart and something we need to know about because that is a region that has been impacted by toxic contamination. So she's looking to help clean up their drinking water. And most of us probably will recognize her voice. I certainly did, from WAMC. She's a weekly commentator and a regular panelist on the Roundtable, their morning show. So I'd like us now to welcome Judith Eng.
Thanks everyone for coming out tonight. So yes, I grew up in Cairo and I graduated from St. Patrick's in 1977. Do not do the math. I want to take a little bit of a different perspective in terms of process and then go through some of the facts that I and others have gathered on this project. So, what my friends and family know about me is I hate to do holiday shopping. Hate it, hate it, hate it. And about 2 Christmases ago, December 20th, 2017, I got a call from an environmental advocate in Pennsylvania telling me that the cement plant in Queens, Ravina, Lehigh, was going to import a third of the state of Connecticut's solid waste to burn at that cement plant. And the DEC had already had approved them burning tires. And it was a hard issue because the cement plant is a big employer in the town. But almost instantaneously, some of the residents of Queens, a few women who are here tonight, reached out to their town board, their town supervisor and their town board members, and they said, we know enough about this process to say no to it. And so literally within days, and I always felt bad for ruining the holidays for a small group of people, we did a news conference with the town supervisor of Queens, town board members, environmental leaders, and said, this is not acceptable in Queens. We are rejecting this. And then about a year and a half later, just a few weeks ago, the town board and the town supervisor passed a local clean air law putting tremendous restrictions on what the company can burn at that cement plant. And I think that is a local example just up the road of what local elected officials can do when they want to stand up and make environmental protection and public health protection a priority. We need to know that because this is a very serious proposal from Wheelabrator. Here's what we know so far. They want to build an incinerator ash landfill in the town of Catskill about 1/2 mile from the Hudson River. They want to truck roughly 445,000 tons of ash every year into Catskill, and they want to do it for 48 years. Phase 1 and Phase 2 last 48 years. The incinerator ash would come from 3 of Wheelabrator's existing operating incinerators, one in Peekskill, Westchester County, one in Poughkeepsie, one in Hudson Falls. As Hudson mentioned, Wheelabrator is the 2nd largest waste incinerator company in the country. They own 19 garbage incinerators and 3 ash dumps in the US and Britain. They are a waste burning giant, and they are about to get bigger. Go back. No, the smoke's next. That one. So that's the Wheelabrator incinerator in Westchester County, which would be sending Catskill its ash. Next slide, please. Keep it there. So Wheelabrator was just purchased by the Macquarie Bank, in Australia, one of the largest banks in the world. They were just purchased this past February. And we know that they have identified the Peckham Industries site for their operation. It would cover 159 acres of land. And I want to just spend a moment explaining that incinerators do not eliminate the need for landfills. Think about your wood stove or your fireplace. After you burn wood, what's on the bottom? Right. And I'm not too worried about that ash because it's from burning wood. I'm very worried about the ash when you're burning garbage because you know what's in the municipal waste stream. And lately, it's getting worse. With electronic material, you have more heavy metals. The more plastic that is burned, the more dioxin is formed. So remember this little equation. For every 4 tons of trash that's burned, you get 1 ton of ash. You get 2 types of ash. Fly ash, which is the fine particulates from the air pollution equipment. So the tall stack will have fabric filters. The toxins don't get destroyed after you burn them, but they get captured by the particulate controls, and then that winds up in the fly ash. And then bottom ash, which is the non-combustible residue remaining after burning. Next slide. Fly ash in particular has a high concentration of toxic compounds. The one I'm very concerned about is dioxin. What I do by day is I teach at Bennington College in Vermont, and I teach classes on plastic pollution and the need to reduce single-use plastic packaging. And I think after this project goes away, we should all work together on passing some local laws to reduce plastic packaging. When you burn plastic, dioxin is formed. Not a lot, but it doesn't take a lot of dioxin in the environment to cause harm. Dioxin is a human carcinogen. The fly ash also contains heavy metals, including lead, a neurotoxin which affects children's ability to learn, mercury, which damages our central nervous system and our kidneys in developing fetuses. We also know that ash has cadmium, arsenic, and chromium. And the stronger the air pollution controls, the more toxic the fly ash. So Wheelabrator wants to bring this ash to Catskill. I've identified where they say the ash will come from, but there's a little sentence in their site selection report that says that they could also have the potential to accept other inert waste streams that be brought here. Wheelabrator has had many meetings with the New York State Department of Environmental Conservation. They submitted an initial permit application to the DEC 2 years ago, in March of 2017. And in the application, Wheelabrator said, initial engagement with the public sector demonstrated community interest in having the project move through the due process review.
I didn't get the memo.
Well, that's in the Wheelabrator document. So Wheelabrator will argue that their ash is not toxic, and that is technically incorrect. But let me explain why they will say that. It's not regulated as toxic because in the mid-'80s, incinerator ash was failing the old leachate test. Fly ash failed all the time, bottom ash failed 39% of the time, and if you combined it, it failed the toxicity test 48% of the time. Now, if this ash was considered a hazardous waste under regulation, and if it had to go to a commercial hazardous waste disposal facility, it would shut down every garbage incinerator in this country. So what happened was the EPA tried to look at this more objectively, and Wheelabrator went to court and said that solid waste should be exempt from toxic testing. The case went all the way to the Supreme Court. Could someone ask the nice people outside to keep their voices down a little? Sorry.
Keep your voices down outside.
Thank you.
Quiet outside.
Sounds like my late mother. So the case went to the Supreme Court, which ruled in 1994 that ash must be tested, and if it failed, it had to go to a hazardous waste disposal facility. The State Department of Environmental Conservation was worried about that, so instead they declared the ash, quote, special waste. And then the Supreme Court left it to EPA to determine how the toxic leachate test was done. EPA weakened the testing protocol.
Right.
This industry is very financially lucrative, and EPA allowed them to mix the fly ash with the toxic ash. And the important thing is the science is if you test it, you will find the heavy metals and you will find dioxin. One scientist referred to this regulatory process as linguistic detoxification. So a few words about Wheelabrator. In 2011, the state of Massachusetts fined Wheelabrator a record $7.5 million for violating the state's environmental laws, multiple violations. The Massachusetts Environmental Commissioner called it the highest fine ever for a state case arising out of environmental violations. Some of the Wheelabrator violations including they found a hole in the roof and the side wall of the Wheelabrator ash house, enabling the release of ash into the air, failure to properly treat the ash before disposal, and release of wastewater into surrounding wetlands. And we have wetlands here at this site. At another Wheelabrator facility, release of 15,000 gallons of ash water. And that investigation started by the state of Massachusetts in 2009, but was not concluded until 2011. And we don't really have much of an environmental cop on the beat anymore, so it's a long time that problems will languish. And if you want a more recent example of how Wheelabrator treats its communities, the city of Baltimore has a Wheelabrator incinerator in a low-income neighborhood in Baltimore. Baltimore did a better job recycling and stopped sending as much waste to the Wheelabrator incinerator. So what did they do? They turned around and sued the city of Baltimore for $32 million for not sending them more waste. Wheelabrator targets communities that are economically struggling. They count on people not having the time to fight back against these proposals, which I think the turnout tonight and your continued work will dispel them of that impression. So here are a couple reasonable questions to ask. New York Department of Environmental Conservation has never approved landfilling incinerator ash in a quarry. Why does Catskill want to be the first? Ash residue is very fine. A lot of it will be carried by the wind to adjacent areas, and a lot of it will go across the river into Columbia County. How will the nearby Great Bly wetland be impacted? Remember Hurricane Irene. And so this ash landfill is not covered. We don't know how much money Wheelabrator is offering the town of Catskill. It's perfectly legal for them to suggest a host community benefit, which I call a public bribe. There's nothing illegal, but it's why communities why companies like Wheelabrator come to economically struggling communities. And they will provide property tax revenue, no doubt. But I think there are better uses for this site. I mean, I totally understand that the village leaders and the town leaders want to get this property back on the tax roll. But how about proactively going out and looking for environmentally sustainable businesses, like a solar farm, like a composting operation, something related to ecotourism. And I want to explain what happens if you just leave this to New York Department of Environmental Conservation, who the agency is made up of really good, hardworking professional people. They don't live here. They're dealing with many, many different projects. And what happens, because DEC cannot not entertain a proposal like this, but to date, they've said it's not a complete application. What happens is this soul-sucking process that goes on for at least, this will be 6, 7, 8 years, where there are hearings, where if you're opposed to the project, you're going to have to join forces, hire environmental lawyers, hire engineers, hire scientists. My conservative estimate is this will run $100,000 easily. I don't think it's likely that residents in Catskill are going to pony up $100,000, but that's what happens if these proposals are made in more affluent communities. So the time to stop this is before the process starts. This is not rocket science. We know enough about the science to know that this is bad for people's health, for the Hudson River, for the environment. And I think, next slide, I think Paul Gallay, the president of Hudson River Keepers, said it best when he said, we did not spend the last 50 years cleaning up the Hudson River to have it at risk with this project. Thank you.
I would just like to speak to one point that you just made. Catskill's not as poor as we tend to think it is. Our town supervisor, when she came on board, had $27,000 in the account to work with, and she just reported $700,000 reported to the state comptroller de Napoli. Those are the figures that I've been given, so I'm going to trust they're correct. So we're not that desperate. I don't want to paint the picture that we're this poor struggling town grasping for anything. We don't need to be that because we do have some money in the bank. We are solvent right now. Okay, I just wanted to have that counterpoint to that. Next.
You have to speak into the microphone.
Okay, how's this?
Great.
Better.
Okay,
Just right close.
good. Richard Webster. Richard Webster is the legal director for Riverkeeper. He formerly worked at Public Justice in Washington, D.C., the Eastern Environmental Law Center in New Jersey, and at Arnold, I always want to say Arnold and Palmer, Arnold and Porter law offices in New York. Before becoming an attorney, Richard was an expert hydrologist and environmental scientist. He has provided expert advice and support to, among others, the Natural Resources Defense Council, the Environmental Defense Fund, the Sierra Club, and the World Bank. Richard received his law degree from Columbia University Law School, where he was editor of the Journal of Environmental Law. He earned his master's degree from London University in engineering hydrology and a BA in physics from Oxford University in England. So please join me in welcoming Richard Webster.
Thank you very much. It's a great pleasure to be here. I'm not going to make any claims to being local or having graduated from local high school, so I hope you'll still believe some words I say. But I did want to start with a little bit of personal background because I think it's important to understand where I come from with these things. As the intro said, I'm a recovering hydrologist. I switched to environmental law basically because it seemed to me that science wasn't really working. Really dumb proposals, if they could meet the legal requirements, are getting approved. And so common sense didn't seem to apply. Lawyers seemed to be in charge. So I figured, how hard could it be to become a lawyer? Turned out to be a big mistake, but that's another story. Okay, so I've been around the country actually working on coal ash dumps. And coal ash dumps, the ash is somewhat similar to this, not quite the same, but it's basically similar properties, very leachable, doesn't show up on the EPA leaching test as toxic, but it really is toxic. And I've seen a lot of towns that regret allowing these dumps. Basically, having a dump in the town impedes economic development. And I've seen many towns promise things that never materialize and end up with pollution and problems. And they come to regret the initial decision of saying, oh, this will be great because we'll get some tax revenue, we'll get a host fee, etc. And then once a dump starts, it's very hard to stop it. I worked on the biggest coal ash dump in America, Little Blue Run in Pennsylvania, and it just expanded and expanded and expanded to the point where it was this 1,600 acre pond, and they were planning to extend it more. It spanned 2 states, actually. It spanned West Virginia and PA, and they were planning to extend it more. It took a big lawsuit to get to take that expansion proposal away, and it ended up being a $200 million cleanup. So those are the stories that I've seen. I think these are cautionary tales for Catskill and this area, because it's a lot easier to prevent a bad proposal from coming to fruition than it is to close something that's already open. So as you might tell from the slides, I think on the intro, I'm from Riverkeeper. Our job is to protect the Hudson River and the drinking water from New York City. And basically, our perspective on this, as Paul Galay's quote makes clear, is that there's a legacy of toxins from industrial activity on the Hudson. Just to give you an illustration, there's a fish advisory in place. Women under 50 and children under 15 should eat no fish from the Hudson. So, and we've made some progress in terms of water quality, but fish species are not recovered. So we're dedicating to reducing that legacy pollution, preventing new sources of pollution, and recovery of the fish and other organisms. So where does this fit in with this proposal? Answer, this proposal will put more toxins into the Hudson, either because it leaks or because the toxins go out through the local sewage treatment plant. And that is absolutely the wrong way to go. The Hudson is an invaluable resource that we need to enhance and protect. Okay, well, I think Judith eloquently told this story already, so I don't need to do that, which is basically, there's all this argument about leaching tests, and you can read the science, but the bottom line is that the way the leaching tests work is you put acid in, and then the acid leaches out the metals. But where the ash is itself alkali, the alkali then neutralizes the acid. So you can end up with not all the metals coming out. And so it basically undercounts the metals in the ash. And because it undercounts the metals in the ash, then the ash looks less toxic than it really is. So that's, and there's some more science, or at least there was some more, while Judith was at the EPA, there was some more science going on. I don't know how it is now, which is experimenting with different leaching tests that indeed shows that if you put more acid in, you get more metals out. So where is this Wheeler-Brader proposal right now? Well, it's basically in abeyance. Wheeler-Brader applied to DEC for a landfill permit back in March 2017. DEC did a pretty good job at analysing what was going on here, and it basically found that there's limestone with conduits in the area. You see that because there are springs in the area, and those springs are a result of, they're basically the ends of pathways in the limestone that take water directly from one place in the rock to another. So in those kind of situations, it makes it very hard to monitor the groundwater because your wells tend to miss those conduits. So basically, your groundwater goes straight past the wells. And one of the requirements that DEC has for landfills is they have to be what's called monitorable. You have to be able to tell, is the liner leaking? And in a situation where you have preferential pathways where they may bypass the wells, you can't tell whether the landfill is leaking. So they found the site is unmonitorable because of the ground conditions, and we'll hear a lot more from Dave about those. And they also found that it's a quarry, it's down into bedrock, it's impossible to meet the bedrock separation requirements. And Wheeler-Brader tried to add on various bells and whistles onto the proposal, and DEC said, the point of these siting requirements is it's about the site. We know, basically, that all liners leak in the end. The whole point of the regulations is to make sure that landfills are on sites where if it does leak, it won't cause a big environmental problem. So we don't really care about your bells and whistles, we just think this is the wrong site. Now, what does DEC do in those circumstances? They don't say, never come back to us again. What they say is, your application has failed to show that you met these requirements. So we're going to deem, the jargon is we're going to deem your application incomplete. Right, so once the application is deemed incomplete, then the applicant is at liberty to come back and submit more stuff later. But there is no ongoing process. So basically, DEC has done a good job here of recognising the potential water impacts. There is no ongoing process at the DEC right now. So the application is dormant. But the DEC isn't in the business generally of killing these projects. It is in the business of this excruciating process. And it's not a process that you want to wait for, because you could be waiting for Godot could be quicker than waiting for DEC sometimes. Why do I say it will definitely put toxins in the Hudson River? The reason is what's going to happen with the leachate. Leachate is generated when either rainwater or intruding groundwater hits the ash. It then leaches out heavy metals like lead, mercury, cadmium, arsenic. And then they have a leachate control system. They suck up the leachate. And then what are they going to do with it? Well, at the moment, and this leachate, by the way, has the salinity of seawater. What that means is it has a lot of ions, metal ions, in the leachate. What are they supposed to do with it? Answer, truck it to the local sewage treatment plant. Why is that a bad idea? Because basically the sewage treatment plant is designed to treat sewage, right? It has a settlement phase, then it has a biological treatment phase where they blow air through, bacteria grow. None of that does anything for metals. If anything, adding metals can upset the treatment process that is going on. And so basically, by doing this, what they're doing is they're taking a pollution control system, then they're pouring those pollutants directly into the river. And that has to be unacceptable. And so, if you don't take anything else away from tonight, take away the fact that this is a crazy proposal to dump toxins directly into the Hudson River. As an anecdote, I once went to a sewage treatment plant in the UK, and it was just primary treatment, so they settled, and then they get sludge from the settlement. And I said, well, what do you do with the sludge? They're like, oh, well, once a month we grind it all up and we send it down the outfall. So this is kind of a similar approach, right? It's sort of, it looks like treatment, but it actually doesn't do anything. Other issues with this proposal? Well, the ash is light, as Juliet said, so you're going to get dust problems. I mean, coal ash sites, coal ash dumps, everywhere you see ash spread around. And this is going to be no different. I did some calculations on the truck traffic, which I think are optimistic. I came up with 38 trucks a day. More learned folks than I came up with 100 trucks a day. But whichever way you want to play it, it's a lot of trucks a day. You've got to ask yourself, remember those trucks are laden with ash. They're normally covered, but you get bits dropping off here and there. And so you want to ask yourself, do you want, and those are just the ash trucks, then you have the leachate trucks. So you want to ask yourself, do you want all those trucks coming through your community? And if you don't know the answer to that, take a trip to some other communities, and I think you can ask the residents there what they think. And then there's this idea of, will this generate revenue for the town? And I can tell you that the answer is no. The answer is, you put a dump in the town, you put trucks coming through the town. What does that do? It means that high value businesses don't want to come here. It means that generally your rents will start to suffer, your valuations start to suffer, and so the town actually, far from profiting from a dump, actually loses money. And even the threat of a dump, and this is why, Judith's right when she says this is a good time to do something about this. Don't sit around and wait. Because even the threat of a dump means that people say, I don't know, I'm not sure I want to go there. Do I want to be near the dump? No, right? That's surrounding the people who own land around. Can they do anything while there's a threat of a dump? No. Right, so the threat of a dump impedes everything else. So finally, there's this question about what can municipalities do, and the answer is, as Judith has already alluded to, a lot. Right, New York has a pretty liberal law in terms of what municipalities can do, and I've still got an escalating set of alternatives for the town. One is just publicly state it opposes an ash dump. That's pretty straightforward. Two, pass a resolution stating the opposition. And Catskill could do that, and other towns can do that too. And actually, we have some sample. If you're motivated to pass a resolution saying you think this dump is a bad idea, we have some sample resolutions in the other room, which you pick up and use for inspiration. And the final thing is you can pass a law. As Judith said, a number of communities have passed laws regarding pipelines, fracking, and refuse incineration. And here there's no in law they call it a vested right. If you have some right to do something, they take it away, then you have a lawsuit. But here they have no right to do it. The local zoning law doesn't make this a permitted use. It doesn't allow it right now. They would need a variance from local zoning law. They haven't even applied. So there's no vested right to put this landfill in this quarry. So therefore, you can pass a law that says that ash dumps within a certain distance from the Hudson are prohibited uses, for example, or you could make them a special permit use. There's lots of legal angles that you can use to signal that you do not want this dump here. So yes, it is private property, but at the moment, the owner of the private property has no right to site that dump there. Don't let anybody tell you different. So basically, we'll be open for questions later, but I hope that you realise that the future is in your hands, right? You can't wait for DEC to kill this. We have to get local people to come, make your voices heard, and kill this project as soon as possible. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Richard. So now we have our fellow Catskillian, Dave Walker, has been a resident of Catskill and boats here for now over 16 years. He is the Professor Emeritus of Earth and Environmental Sciences at Columbia University. He received his PhD from Harvard. He's a member of the National Academy of Sciences and has a list of awards and medals that would take the rest of the evening if I went through them all. The most important reason for our discussion tonight is that Dave has taught the geology of our area for his entire career at Columbia. He has 16 years of experience studying and teaching the very structure we're talking about tonight, the structure, the hydrology, and the geological history of our area, including that in and around the Peckham Quarry. So, Dave, are you one of those guys that we see like out Route 23 with all the orange vests?
Yeah, I'm out there every May.
Oh, that's wonderful. We love you for that. Ladies and gentlemen, David Walker.
Thanks very much, and thanks very much for coming on this evening. Right up to my mouth. Okay. Thanks very much for coming. It's a pleasure to be here. What I'd like to offer you tonight is a geological evaluation of the Peckham Quarry site with respect to the question of is it an appropriate place to put a toxic ash dump, and I'll explore such things as what is the bedrock limestone karstic, and I'll explain what that is. Will it leak toxic ash to the groundwater? Is it a good basin to put stuff in? And at what point will the toxins, how quickly will they get to the Hudson River? There are a couple of show-stopping problems with the proposal already, just right out of the gate. If you asked any group of geologists, it would be very quickly consensus that the worst possible sort of bedrock that you could site this kind of a project on in Greene County would be the carbonates shown here in red along the eastern margin of the county, which form the Helderberg Escarpment. If you were looking for a bad spot within bad rocks, you would site the quarry, or you would site the ash dump as close to the river as possible, and here the Peckham quarries are as close to the river as any point in the whole county. So this is a really unfortunate choice. It's astonishingly bad from a geological point of view before we even look at the details of the structure and the history of the area. What's the problem with limestone or the carbonates of the Helderberg Escarpment? Well, they're soluble in water and they become leaky after being dissolved for long enough. The limestone bedrock becomes porous, it cracks, the cracks enlarge by dissolution. And the end stage of this process is a terrain known as karst, in which sinkholes, caves, disappearing streams, terra rosa soils are formed, all of which are present locally, and you get a leaky hydrology. It's impossible to keep anything in one place in a hydrology like that, as Richard mentioned. Karstification isn't anything like pregnancy where you are or you aren't. It's more like, when does a grape turn into a raisin? It's an imperceptible change to develop karst. And so really, the question, is it karst, which plays very large role in the back and forth between DEC and Wheelabrator, that is the wrong question. What you care about is not whether it has a shiny, distracting name like karst, but does it leak? Are you dealing in this quarry with a sealed basin, or are we dealing with a sieve? Here's a sealed basin, nice cast iron pot with a porcelain glaze on it. But if you chip the porcelain and get the iron inside to rust, you might conceptually wind up with something that's a little bit holier. Here's a sieve. So we want one of these, but if you're dealing with a limestone bedrock, you're probably dealing with one of these instead. Well, okay, what if we took this sieve, which, you know, maybe we could line it with something and it would still catch the stuff, and what if we turned it over? Here's a bunch of cross-sections through the geology of this area, largely orchestrated by Steve Marshak, whose thesis I was the field examiner for, so I feel it was done right. Here's a sieve upside down. Here's one upside down. Here's one that's turned on its side. This is not a promising sealed basin, because in addition to the fact that these basins are chopped up by tectonic forces, which are more or less like a train wreck, we're dealing with a series of faults. Oops, sorry, I'm not very good. Oops. We're dealing with a series of faults, detachments, you can call a detachment a fault on steroids, cleavages, and other virtually every line on this diagram is a potential pathway to send water into the depths of the groundwater resource. And for good measure, the quarry, which has that kind of geology that I just showed you, has been dynamited for about a century, and if you didn't have cracks before, you're sure going to have them after you've done that sort of a treatment. So it really would be hard to find a worse site in Greene County to do this project. It's the wrong rock type, it's tectonically damaged, it's been blown up for a century, and it's right near the Hudson. So this is not unknown to the DEC, and they sort of raised their eyebrows and said, what about it? And Wheelabrator actually said a lot. Their first installment about 3 years ago was a professional-looking report of in excess of 100 pages. That ran into a buzzsaw at DEC. They really took them apart. The letters from Vincent Fay and Vicki Schmidt were, I would have to characterize as politely hostile. And as a result, Wheelabrator took a deep breath and came back with a report that was in excess of 1,000 pages. And the difference between the two makes very interesting reading, but we don't have time for comparing them tonight. What the Wheelabrator professionals and their consultant engineers assert is that they know the geology, they know the geophysics, they know the hydrogeology of the area, and therefore it's an appropriate site. They told us so. What I'm here to suggest to you tonight is a careful reading of their own reports say that there's a very serious disconnect between the facts that they present and the conclusions that they reach that this is an acceptable site for an ash dump of toxic waste. So let's talk about the geology that they know about. On the left, whoa, I got this darn thing wrong again. On the left, we have a map of the quarry site that's going to be used for the ash dump, if they get their way. And we have a cross-section through it. And in fact, they gave dozens of cross-sections, and I've chosen this one for reasons which will become apparent in a couple of more slides. And it's fine as far as it goes. It shows you the geology from a map view and from a section view. But you'll notice that there's white, unfilled area under there. There's a lot of geology which is well known in this region and in these quarries which is simply missing. Where are the detachments? Where are those faults on steroids which show so much damage and so much leakage in every other place where they're seen? Where is the manliest limestone, the Queemans and so forth, which are the principal karst formers in the region, the ones that are the leakiest? They're just simply removed or not in, in the picture on this map. And that's a serious omission if you're trying to understand the real risks that are present in the geological composition of this site. Oops, let's try this again. Marshak again, he shows you what the geology actually looks like. The quarry is right about here. There's a double layer of karstic manlius limestone underneath this quarry, which the Wheelabrator report essentially denies the existence of. That's a problem. Let's look at the geophysics which they've presented. It's a good survey. They used electrical sounding methods to essentially prospect for water channels and water intrusions into the depths of the quarry. Here's a Google image that shows you an eastern pond and a chain of 3 western ponds. And the red lines are in fact the lines of section along which they did their geophysical surveys that were looking for water. This box here, I'm going to show you their interpretation of what happens in the subsurface. This lurid color scheme is easy to decode. Everything that's blue is highly conductive and therefore wet. And what they show is the eastern pond has a big plume of groundwater coming out of it. The western pond likewise has a big plume of groundwater. And the major fault which they map in this position in the cross-section is in fact a conductive layer itself. Now, remember, I faulted them for not showing you the manlius and the other things that are beneath the basal detachment under the quarry. But in fact, the geophysical survey picks them up, and here it is there. So, you know, we have reason to trust this survey, and it's telling us this stuff is connected hydrologically at depth and very extensively. So the notion that this thing isn't going to leak is preposterous on the basis of their own information. They say, don't worry about it. There are at least 3 important lines of defense. They say we don't need to take seriously what the geophysics and the geology are telling us. First of all, there's no manlius, I can't figure this thing out. There's no manlius limestone, there's no karst, there's no leaks. But in fact, there is manlius present under this whole quarry, probably a double tectonic layer of it with detachments. And it's now visibly leaking onto 9W. Here's a picture of the spring which emerges from the by the way, here, this is in the, I don't like this thing, it doesn't behave. Here's 9W, and I'm going to be standing there looking back up at the hill where the quarry is just behind. So here, looking at the spring, which emerges here from the hillside, there are, you know, solution-enhanced joints reaching right to here. This is south of Embo Road, so it's a little north of the quarry site. But it's very definitely connected to the hydrology of the quarry, because if you read page 1166 of their report, they dumped dye into the quarry and it came gurgling out here. So this stuff leaks, and it leaks in their own telling of the story. They do a wiggle dance to make you sort of be distracted from this obvious show-stopping leak. They say, well, you know, here's the leak in this part of the sieve, but up where we're going to dump the ash is perfectly safe. So I'm going to show you what happens at this end of the section, and I'll show you what happens right where they have the quarry. This is not rocket science to do from a geological point of view. You only have to drive along Route 9W, and here south of the quarry near Cementon, there is in fact a cave. It's got a wet floor. Let's go right to where the quarry is. The quarry is just over the hill, the one that they're going to fill with ash, and right over the hill is the Tracy's Landing has a big pond there. That's the eastern pond in the quarry. Just east of that mid-quarry point below the Tracy's Landing pond, there's a wet seep. That's 10 days ago, that one was wet. And you can see the glint through the trees of the afternoon sun coming off a wet surface. So the issue isn't, are these quarries leaking? The issue is, how fast are they leaking? We have only to go to the wheel operator report and look, you know, you just sort of read through the first 1,000 pages or so, and then you hit gold in the 990s. And they tell you, from having done a really good water budget, that these quarries are in fact leaking, and just one of them, the big one that they looked at, the Tracy's Landing, has a discharge rate into groundwater of about 100 gallons a minute. There's the number. It comes from them, not from me. If you say how much water have you lost into the groundwater, it's 50 million gallons a year. It's more in wet years, it's less in dry years. So I submit that the disconnect between their own data, which shows a tremendous leak, and the conclusion that this is a perfectly adequate and safe site is not sustainable. They're showing you a smoking gun, but they're telling you it's only a leaky water pistol. Okay, the second line of defense is that the New Scotland can't develop karst, and therefore the green layer, this one here, which is the New Scotland, is going to be a seal to the bottom of the quarry. That's a good argument because the New Scotland is in fact quite full of clay. The problem is that the New Scotland is folded into an anticline here and a syncline there, which has been busted up a bit by faults. And when you do that to a clay-rich material, it develops something called axial plane cleavage, which turns out is a really good conduit for water. So, is the New Scotland a good seal? No. So here's a spring up at Jefferson Heights. Same deal. It's coming out of the base of the Manlius. This one's got a pretty good discharge to it, but I should point out that this was the spring after Irene that I took this picture, so there was a lot of water in the system. But how did it get in the system? You know what? It uses the joints in the axial plane cleavage of the New Scotland to put the water right here into the lower part of the karst system of the Manlius. The New Scotland is not a seal, it's a funnel. It directs water right through it and right into the places where it's going to discharge, as you've seen it discharging along the Hudson.
Something like that today. Today, no, that one.
Okay, all right, good. Yeah, I haven't been, I was there 10 days ago and it wasn't that wet, but you know, we had some rain, so yeah. Right, very good. Okay, the third line of geological defense, it says this quarry is bulletproof, is the claim that the Holocene period, that's everything. Oops, I've done a number on that. I don't know if we're going to have these slides advanced. Maybe
Just point when you're ready.
Right, thank you very much. The Holocene is the modern time since the Ice Age, and the question is it really stable, or is bedrock motion still possible? Let me take you up to Route 23. Thank you, John. Sorry about my extreme clumsiness with pointers. Here's the big road cut along 23 just off the Jefferson Heights exchange. This is westbound traffic. Here's a sinkhole. Yeah. Here's a sinkhole up at the top that's been truncated by the excavation of Route 23. And I'm going to take you down to this little sapling that's about halfway down the outcrop and show you what's behind that little sapling. I have indicated drill holes with these dotted lines, which were drilled in the excavation of this in the very late 50s. And instead of being this drill hole connects right through, oh look, there's been offset on that drill hole that has occurred since 1959. This area is not stable. Yeah, and if you back off, and so this branch I pruned so I could get a better shot that shows you not only do the drill holes show this disconnection of fault motion since 1960 or so, but the joint surfaces, which are badly eroded in this period because you're right under a sinkhole, are also offset. So the claim that this area is stable in modern times is not accurate. So we're in a position now to answer the question of, is this site an appropriate place to put an ash dump that isn't going to leak? No! It's the wrong rock type. It's next to the Hudson. It's tectonically damaged. It's leaking now, and it's still moving. And that's before they get around to making their hydrological separation zone by blasting the living daylights out of it and making it rubble to a depth of 10 feet at least. Wheelbrader knows this. The DEC knows this. That's why they gave him such a hard time. And now you know this too. And you guys are in a position to bring this to the attention of our good folks in government to see if we can get this stopped in time. So, since everybody knows this, Wheelabrator tacitly has given up on the geology of the area. What they do is they propose, we're going to put an industrial strength double liner in this quarry. To me, that's like taking that leaky sieve I showed you, going up to the price chopper, getting a bunch of baggies and stuffing it in there and saying the job's done. Imagine that you had a donkey. And the donkey gets a racing saddle put on it, and you pretend it's a racehorse. It isn't. It's still a donkey, and if you take it up to the Travers Stakes in Saratoga this August, it's going to end badly for you. In the same way that double lining this quarry is going to end badly for you. Engineering fixes of this sort are not going to give you an adequate protection from long-term liability. The issue isn't when it's going to leak. It is going to leak. The liner, when you put it in and dump ash on it, isn't going to be repairable. It isn't going to be repairable. So the liner is essentially just a speed bump on how fast the leachate escapes rather than a seal. And you have to ask yourself, is Wheelabrator going to be around in 50 years when the problems are going to develop? And you really want to know how good our insurance policy here in Catskill is. Well, I have a cautionary tale, and the number 50 years for the need for a cleanup is not randomly chosen. Here's the Hanford Reservation out on the Columbia River near Richland, Washington, which was the principal plutonium production facility for our nuclear stockpile during the Cold War. So, the fact that it was a nuclear weapons production facility for breeding plutonium means that there were a lot of very toxic and very radioactive fission byproducts which had to be disposed of. Nuclear ash instead of incinerator ash. So the DOE, and their predecessor, the Atomic Energy Commission, didn't take a sieve and lining with a baggy approach. They took a double containment approach that was really a good deal more substantial. Reinforced concrete tanks lined with welded steel liners. Double containment engineering, the same way that Wheelabrator proposed, but on a whole different level. The problem is that they didn't foresee. There are always unforeseen consequences in engineering projects. They didn't see that the radioactive sludge would evolve hydrogen and then fuel chemical explosions within the tanks. So about a third of those tanks out at Hanford are leaking now, and the groundwater is contaminated by radioactive material. The good news is you can track it easily when it's radioactive. So there's the plutonium production facility with its tank farm. And it's taken about 50 years for the the radioactive waste to escape the tank farm and get very close to the river. This is a multi-billion-dollar remediation and cleanup project that the DOE is currently has in process. The 50-year timescale out in the desert of eastern Washington is going to be a lot shorter timescale in the Hudson Valley, where the precipitation is about 3 times as great, and where the quarry at the top of the Helderberg escarpment has some extra hydraulic head to move the stuff through it a good deal faster than it moves out here in Washington. So my pitch to you today is, let's not become Hanford on the Hudson. Let's learn the lessons that we can learn from that and avoid inappropriate bedrock sites for storing nasty stuff. We should also avoid siting our toxic waste dumps near big rivers, where if problems develop, they'll be broadcast. We certainly have to protect ourselves from long-term liability, and I don't think an adequate insurance policy for this is in place. So I think we should just take a pass on this ash dump project. It's a preventable disaster which is proposed to be put in the worst possible place in Greene County. And there's no national emergency like the Cold War forcing us to make this choice now. Don't buy the wheelabrator pitch. Here's that donkey with the racing saddle on it. If you enter it in the wheelabrator sweepstakes, we're all going to be jackasses. So I urge you to say no, say it now, say it often, and say it loudly.
Thank you. Dave, I think